Hello, today we're going to be talking a little bit about flexibility training versus mobility training, the difference between the two, as well as some different tools that you can use to improve the effectiveness of some of the things that you're doing to try to improve your range of motion. So when we talk about flexibility, basically what we're talking about is the ability for our joints and muscles to passively move into new ranges of motion. And so a typical example of something that would be working on flexibility would be any kind of passive stretch that you could think of. And so that could be reaching for your toes. That could be a typical just like quad stretch. So using my arms to kind of pull my leg up in that position to get a stretch on the front of my thigh. Any stretch where we're not really using much active muscle is considered flexibility training. Mobility training or active mobility training is a different thing where we're still looking for new ranges of motion, but we're trying to actively get there by using our muscles and our strength and motor control to actually move ourselves into those new positions. I really like to focus my training in that realm more on the mobility side of things. You still need flexibility in order to get yourself into those positions, but by training strength in those end ranges, you can make those new ranges that your body acquires much safer and much more usable. And it ends up having a lot more of an impact on the activities that you might be using those ranges of motion for. There are a few different techniques that we use as part of our kin stretch classes that we offer at the clinic for improving strength at end range, and we'll go through a few of those little things right now. The example that we're going to use is a hamstring stretch, so we'll get into that position, and I'll show you a few different ways that you can start to work at the strength of that end range once we're there. So if I'm working on my flexibility or my passive range of motion, basically all I'm doing is I'm trying to get a stretch on the tissues that I'm trying to get a little bit longer. And so for a hamstring stretch, my leg is coming forward. I'm going to sit up nice and tall and then just lean into it. And so this is a pretty common stretch that most of us have probably done at some point in our lives. When we're working on that flexibility, basically we're just hanging out here for a long period of time, giving those muscles a chance to relax. We might work ourselves into it a little bit more as we go. And what we're going to get out of that is basically just the ability to stretch further the next time that we do this stretch. One thing we can add on to this, and so there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing flexibility training, but if we want to get more active control and more motor control of that range that we've acquired, adding on some strength training at this end range can be a really, really awesome way to do that. One really nice way to do that, and one relatively simple way to do that, is by just starting to contract the muscles on either side of the area that we're working while we're in this stretch. So in this stretch position, one thing that I can do to start working on the strength of my hamstrings in this elongated position is to start to contract them and try to think about almost like pulling my heel towards my knee. So in this position, while I'm stretched, I can slowly kind of ramp up the contraction of my hamstrings. And so it doesn't look like much because I'm not moving, but just by starting to draw my heel into the ground and think about bending my knee, I can feel the muscle and the tendons in the back of my knee starting to work a little bit harder. In order to do this safely, you want to ramp up really slowly. So usually we'll talk about your maximum voluntary effort or your maximum contraction. And so maybe to start off with, you do a couple seconds of like a 10% effort. So you're squeezing that muscle. It's not very hard. It should be relatively easy. You can ramp that up eventually all the way to like 100% maximum effort. It's really hard and you will shake, but you want to make sure that you feel safe and you feel comfortable doing that first. So I would start with the lower percentages first if this is brand new to you. Another thing we can do in this position is also squeeze the muscles on the opposite side of that leg. So after squeezing that hamstring, trying to get it to contract while I'm stretching it, you can also work the short side, which is very hard as well and can feel very cramping when you're working on that. So in this stretched position, maybe I come off of it just a little bit when I work on the other side, but you can also even try to do some little like lift offs. So with that hamstring still in the stretched position, I start to think about pulling my foot off the ground and building strength on the opposite side of that joint, as well as control on the opposite side from that muscle. Another way of working on some of the strength in this range is squeezing those muscles to kind of come in and out of the position. And so rather than just kind of letting myself hang passively forward and stretching out the back, I can move into and out of that position using the muscles on either side of my thigh. And so, for example, bringing myself forward, I can almost think about squeezing some of this stuff on the front of my hip to pull me into that position. So I'm working muscles getting into that position. And then I can slowly squeeze some of the stuff on the back side of my hip and the back side of my thigh coming out of it. And so thinking about pulling myself into the stretched position and then slowly pulling myself out of the stretched position can also be a really good way of building some strength and awareness into this increased range of motion area. So there are a ton of different ways to play around with adding a little bit of strength training in those stretch positions and in those end ranges. We play around a lot with that as a part of our kin stretch classes that we offer at the clinic. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, reach out to the clinic or reach out to myself directly, and I'm happy to give you a little bit more information on some of those services that we offer here.